everyone. Welcome to TERRA Stories Impact Investing Series. In this series, we explore impact-focused public and private companies in multiple market sectors that utilize proven, cost-effective, and game-changing sustainable technologies to reduce costs and increase efficiencies and shareholder value. I'm Gary Brode. I'm the founder of Deep Knowledge Investing. We provide actionable investment ideas and timely market commentary to portfolio managers, hedge funds, and family offices. And today we're welcoming Alex Hoff, founder and CEO of Givvor. Alex, thanks for making the time to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
Great. So just as a starting point, everybody who's listening to this call is familiar with giving money to charity. Can you just take us through the basics of what Givvor is? Why would anybody be giving money through your platform? And maybe just explain to people that it is a platform.
Yeah, well, I think that is the starting point. I mean, it's a platform which, in many ways also means it's a marketplace. And I think the problem that we've identified and that we're trying to solve really is to really bring this into one place, because giving isn't something that just happens in an isolated fashion. And I mean, we've seen just about every industry disrupted by this idea that, between the sharing economy and things as early as Amazon. We probably are all old enough to remember buying something on Amazon, not because we needed something, because we went, wow, I can order something over the internet. And if you fast forward 20 some years later and you look at the world of philanthropy, it still works that way. You have to go to each individual nonprofit to buy something. And we've seen from commerce and communities and social media that everything has become based on the customer, based on whoever the buyer is, and being able to make that transaction as smooth as possible. And that benefits everybody in the marketplace. And so for us, it means a level of transparency so you can build trust. There's always issues with any online transaction because you don't have that same human component, that you've got to be able to see other people doing it. You've got to see how they use it and build trust. You've got the aspect of community, being able to connect with those other people. And then you've got also just the idea of being able to have everything in one place and learn from, how two groups that seem unrelated may affect each other, and what understandings we can gain from bringing people together that are trying to do good.
Okay, so basically what you're explaining is that Givvor is a platform where people can go and donate in one place on your platform to multiple different charities, hundreds, thousands of different charities, depending on their interests, their needs. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I would say it's, in a way, it's more than just being able to donate. It's being able to kind of connect those donations. So there are 1.8 million nonprofits on the platform. And when you donate to one, you're creating influence to other donors like you. So it really does, without it, first of all, it lets you control your privacy. It puts the donor in charge. But as you go through this world of philanthropy and you have different causes or different nonprofits you're supporting, it really brings other people to those nonprofits, because it starts to understand people have similar principles, people have certain values, and people give to certain sectors, whether it's conservation or food insecurity or whatever it might be. You see most donors, and I would even call them investors, are trying to improve the sector. And they may pick one of the best, horses in that race, but they are trying to really solve a problem, not fund an organization, which becomes another issue that we solve.
Okay, so Alex, what you're talking about here is community, creating a community of givers. And I want to come back to that in a minute. Let's just take a step back for a second. What is it that made you want to start Givvor, and what problem did you see in the charitable giving industry that you wanted to solve?
It's funny because it was very much an organic path in which we got there. I mean, we had worked on, creating various social networks, creating different, marketplaces, websites, et cetera. And through that process, we got to the world of, of fundraising, really. And then as we got a little bit smarter, we got to understand how philanthropy works, how philanthropists work, and how in many cases they drive, the trends that are happening in that. And what we saw was, again, just an industry that hadn't really benefited from the technology innovations that have moved forward, and trying to get people together instead of keeping them apart. Because if you look at the just if you look at the industry of philanthropy, you've got so many different silos of giving that almost are unrelated. They don't have anything to do with each other. You look at the growth that's happened in giving, and it's primarily coming through donor advised funds. Well, donor advised funds have a completely different process that keeps them separate from the other givers that might not be using a donor advised fund, or the foundations who are doing something different. So you've got all these silos that have become transactional, and I think part of that has eliminated the relational, or the relationships that really, from the beginning, what philanthropy was about, was trying to connect people and help people and leverage people who have the means to people that need some help.
So I think part of what you're talking about, though, isn't just connecting donors with the beneficiaries of their charitable giving. You also want to connect donors with each other.
Big time. Big
Okay.
time.
How does that work, and why does it matter?
Well, there's really, I think there are really three core principles that we're built on, and transparency I've already mentioned, but that's about building trust. Both in looking at the organization that's being funded, but looking at how other donors are funding it. So we all know, all the news stories of nonprofits that, either don't give anything to the cause that they want, and they're just funding their salaries, or God knows what. So there's a lot of that where people have built up some mistrust. And then there's also the ones that are just legitimately bad. I mean, there are tons of nonprofits that are either criminal, or created as a front or a tax shelter. And part of getting that to happen is showing that transparency, so that trust is built not just between the donor and the nonprofit, but between the donors. Second piece is just having community, having a place you can reach out to another donor saying, hey, this is interesting what you're doing over here. I'm doing this too. Maybe we can join forces, maybe we can collaborate, maybe we learn from each other, both through direct connections and even through sort of what I call passive connections. I look at, again, kind of going back to donor advised funds. Most people that get into donor advised funds weren't there to be philanthropists, but here they are. Now they have money in an account that they have to give away, and they often have no idea how other people do it. So by seeing how other people do it, it's building community that way too. And the last piece is the privacy piece. I mean, right now, when you make a donation to any nonprofit, you really hope they're going to keep that private. And you hope they have good cybersecurity, and you hope and you hope and you hope. And oftentimes they're the weakest link in that chain, and you're counting on them to keep your information secure. And so moving that whole process to the donor so that they can control their own privacy is also a core tenet to be able to have that trust, not just in the people and the organizations, but in the system you're using and the platform you're using as well.
Okay, so Alex, you've talked about two different competing ideas here.
Yep.
One is transparency, which I know you think is important, but the other is privacy and security. On the transparency side, of course, you want to hold the charitable organizations accountable to their stated mission, make sure they're using the money in the way that they say they're going to. And some people like to have their donations be public, and they feel like that will attract more attention. But we've also seen a very disturbing trend lately for people being doxxed for
Yep.
their charitable donations. Somebody gives money to something, and other people decide they're against that cause, and they try to make sure that person loses their job, or basically is miserable because of it. How does Givvor balance those two competing goals that you talked
Hmm.
about? How do you provide transparency and privacy and security?
Yeah. Yep. Great question. Great. The approach that we take is pretty simple. I mean, every transaction, every donation, every interaction between donors and nonprofits is shown. So if there's a $10,000 donation, I know there's a $10,000 donation. That might inspire me to give as well. So that's the transparency piece. But by moving the capability of keeping it private to the donor gets to decide, to your point. Some people might want their name associated with that $10,000 donation. And so they can make their donation public. They can make their donation 100% anonymous, or they can also make their donation pseudo-anonymous by just using a username. So I know, G. Brode made a $10,000 donation. You can be as creative as you want with your username to see how much how much I can identify that, which exists, right? I mean, we've seen the world of Twitter and fake Steve Jobs and things like that. So let people use their own creativity if they want an identity, but they don't want their personal identity divulged through that.
So, in that situation, uh, the charitable donor would, of course, know who they are. Giver would know who they are because you have to collect the money from somewhere. The charity would not know who they are, nor would the community, assuming an anonymous donation.
Hmm. Correct.
What
Correct.
steps do you take to ensure that privacy is protected?
Well, there's a number of pieces. I mean, one is just cybersecurity and the ability, being a technology first company, we have better capabilities to keep all that information secure than each individual nonprofit might. And some are big enough where they have their own cybersecurity department, but it's not many. And then the other piece is just part of our core belief and understanding. And it's like if you're using a certain manufacturer of phone or a certain operating system that's based on mining your data and showing you ads, they're not going to work that hard to protect that information.
So
We're using
that
it,
would be all of them.
all of them, but I will say there is one that is slightly better and has fought the authorities on violating someone's privacy, breaking into a phone. I'm trying to keep the names out of it, but I think we've seen the stories where they won't do it. They're not going to break into the phone, even in a case where a legitimate crime is committed, because they believe that their users' privacy is paramount, and that is how we look at it as well. We will, within the rules of the law, fight for our customers, and most people won't do that. That's not the model that's evolved, and I think is going to start to turn, or maybe already has turned, where you look at how that it's funny. I think the biggest private thing that's out there right now that's kind of interesting is done through completely making everything public in terms of the blockchain. You've got public information and there's anonymity through that. So part of what we're trying to do is be that place where there's one point that has your information, not thousands or not tens or hundreds, and be able to really take that advocacy role for the donors. And I think that's what's different about Givvor, period, is we're here to make the giver more capable, more secure, more protected, instead of make the fundraising campaign of the day more successful. It will be successful by building that trust, but it's not to make the organization happy at the expense of the donor. It's making sure the donor has control.
Got it. Okay. So I think these security issues and these privacy issues are extremely important. Again, whether you agree with a particular cause or not, I think most of us would agree that this current trend toward doxing people is it's getting out of hand, and it's not good for the state of either giving or political discourse. But once we move past that, why, let's say I have money that I want to give away to charity X. Why would I do that through Givvor instead of going direct to the charity itself?
Yeah, another good question. I think, I mean, again, I can answer it in some specifics, but I even look at sort of the trend line that we're following, and why, if I could buy a product through a manufacturer's website, do I not want to go to each individual website? Why would I use something like Amazon? It's it's all in one place. From at the end of the year when you have to collect those receipts, especially if you're an active giver, you want a quick place to say, okay, I gave the money, I did my part, I did it, I did something good in the world. Now it's tax time. How do I find all those? Where did I give it? How do I find the receipt? Well, there's one place, so that's easy. In fact, you can literally bypass the whole process and just invite your accountant in to get the report. So, so that's there's a tactical or an efficiency piece to that. But more than that, think of most givers are out there to really create an impact. They don't just want to give money. That's not the point. The point is, I want the organization to be successful. So when I give that by writing a check, or I give that by going to their website direct, there's really two people that know about that transaction, the organization and me as the giver. But when we do that through Givvor, and you now bring it back to top of mind for all the other donors that have supported that organization that you're supporting, it turns it from having endless solicitations coming from the nonprofits to your best salespeople being your donors. Every piece of activity is another chance to remind other givers that we're still out there, we're still doing good, and you could give too. You know, hey, look, Gary just gave this $10,000 donation. God, that's great. I've been meaning to do that. I'm going to go give because I saw his transaction or the next person's donation or whatever it is. So by connecting people's transactions, by connecting people to that activity, you're keeping it top of mind for givers to support the causes that they're in favor of, that they're trying to create change with.
That makes a lot of sense, Alex. And I also I don't want people to underestimate the aggravation of having to put your information into, if you're giving to 20 different charities and to 20 different websites,
Mm-hmm.
right? Name, address, credit card number, email address, and filling out the whole, and good luck remembering your username and password for all of them,
Exactly.
right? So
Exactly.
what you guys are doing is providing people um, a way to have one account and give
Mm-hmm.
to everywhere that they'd like to. I will
Well,
also tell you that every time I've given to a charity, they end up sending me enormous amounts of mail over the next 5 to 10 years. Putting
and
that in
calls,
place too. Right, and the calls.
the
Yes.
calls.
Yeah, right. You guys are the intermediary for all of
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, even you just I think what you just identified is such a beautifully subtle point. I don't want 15 logins, right? Usernames and
that.
passwords, remember. But I also don't want to enter that credit card after I've created that login 15 times and remember which one is which. I want them all in one place. And I might choose a different credit card for a different thing, stuff like that. But it even gets into how do how do we remove the barriers, just because again, I saw Gary's donation. I've only got like 30 seconds before I'm distracted with my next notification, right? So how do I get there, make a donation, be done, move on, and know that I can go get it later if I need a receipt? Well, it's easy. If we've got one-click donation because we've already got your information, you can use it for anybody. It's these little things that I think people don't understand is what creates these incredible opportunities that exist within technology. You remove the friction of the transaction and you let people get done in a fraction of the time that it takes otherwise, then the transactions happen. It takes such a little interruption for me to lose attention and go on to something else, especially because there are very few people on this planet that's full-time job is just thinking about who to give all their money away to. There may be a few, and they
Sure.
usually have many staff to do that. But for the rest of us, it's I feel inspired. I'm thankful for what I have. I can do good with it, and that means more to me. But I still have to pick up the kids from school and get to that meeting and do 50 other things today. So if it's cumbersome, I'm probably not going to do it.
Alex, one thing I would add to that, you're talking about speed and ease of use, and you're right. If I have to go find charity X's website and then find the donate here and then fill everything out, and then go get my credit card, I'm probably looking at 10 minutes of work.
Mhm.
And you're right, it's easy to get distracted on Givvor. It's a click, and that's easy. Does that also enable people to make smaller donations? Maybe you'd be on and give 10 or $20 to something where writing a check and putting it in the mail might not be worthwhile. And while that
Right.
might not sound like a lot, look at the last two presidential campaigns. Both President Trump and Senator Sanders raised huge amounts of money, 10, 20, $25 at a
Yes.
time. You can add up a lot of donors very quickly. Now, it's a political example, but wouldn't that also apply in the charitable realm?
It does. I mean, absolutely in both. I mean, it is, and not to mention, I mean, you're talking about those five $10 donors, right? And to have removed the friction and make those happen efficiently enough to raise billions of dollars or whatever it is. I mean, there's two things in play there. I mean, one is it's just not worth a lot of time. It's probably not worth the nonprofit's time to get the check, organize the check, deposit the check, do all that for $5, right? It probably costs them more than $5 to do that. So, okay, electronic transaction is a good thing from that standpoint. But the other piece is, um, sorry, the other piece of this is being able to act on something small and people that are emotionally giving, and a lot of those are millennials. The last time a millennial signed a check,
Right.
it's not, it doesn't, I mean, it's, again, we still live in a world, and I think this is emblematic of the larger industry. We still live in a world where most of the giving happens because someone writes a big check at the end of the year from their foundation or because they need a tax benefit. But that's not going to last for much longer. We've got the next generation that both inheriting that money. There's something like $60 trillion transferring between those generations, and these are people who have never balanced a checkbook. So moving this to the efficiencies of the electronic transaction, but also just recognizing your audience and your market, those are the people that if you're ignoring still and you're not making something that's easy, that is something I can just do quickly and share with my friends, you're living on borrowed time.
Basically, you're the Venmo of charitable giving. It's
Um,
fantastic.
Yeah, very much. I mean, and I think with purpose. I mean, that's the other thing is, Venmo has has some very interesting utility, and it's not like what PayPal was, where it was, a way to purchase things. It's a way to split the tab at lunch or pay the guy for the side bet in a golf game. And that becomes fun. And all of this, I think, becomes incredibly gamified by being able to take those transactions. And I know Gary donated more than me, but I can show up Gary by going a little higher, and then Gary sees that I donated a little bit more, and he goes, "Well, no way, Alex is outbidding me." So I mean, just by bringing that and presenting that to the donors, it becomes fun. It becomes the game. It becomes what you experience in that silent auction at the gala, where you and I are holding up the paddles and trying to outbid each other for something that we could have bought on the street for 1/10 of what it's up to.
Got it. All right.
That's the beauty of it.
Alex, we are starting to get some fantastic questions that people are texting in. So I'm going to limit myself to two more, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience.
Okay.
They're complicated questions, but give me the short version of them. The first of my last two questions is, how do you see the current state of giving? How's philanthropy changing? I know there have been some issues
Yeah.
with it lately where maybe some of the reputation isn't what we'd like it to be. What do you see as sort of the general environment that you're working in right now?
Well, I think it's like anything that's going through a transition, right? I mean, we giving today is not much different than the days of the dawn of it at the turn of the last century. The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, that's kind of that's the dawn of modern philanthropy as we live into it today. And it's time for that to sunset. And I think there's a great example of where nonprofits in general, but philanthropy as a whole, has sort of missed the opportunity. Look at crowdfunding. I mean, you've got you got millions of dollars being raised in a day because the speed at which two humans can interact, again, without any tax benefits, without all the reasons that philanthropy benefits the people involved, you have a challenge with that. And I think the other thing is just it is that speed thing, the speed of innovation. I mean, I take our work with TERRA, and they aren't typical nonprofits. They are trying to affect conservation, they are trying to affect sustainability, and they're trying to make a difference. And so in some cases, they work with specific organizations, but it's always a challenge to go through all of the nuances of each organization's process. So instead, they're able to just pop something up, get some support, get people in, and be able to distribute that money. Now, they also do very innovative things with their expeditions. Here's a chance not just to give to a cause and to, support conservation, but to literally go on the ground and learn it, and to be a part of something that is life changing, especially for a young person. And so, how do you do that? Well, if you have to do that with each individual organization, it's too difficult. It really becomes more, the process becomes more difficult than that effort being expended towards getting the result that's trying to be that's being sought. So being able to adapt to how quickly things change and how quickly things move, and to be able to adapt and be creative is really at its core. And I think, I mean, we've worked with a number of organizations that have been really good at that, but Terra's been one of the best. Every time they come up with a solution, there's a new angle to it that they've discovered that would be, suffocated by the process otherwise.
Alex, that was such a great answer. You actually preempted my last question. I want to ask you about the success stories you've had, and your experience with Terra is the perfect one. So with that, let's, like I said, we're getting some great questions from the live audience. Let's shift to some of the things that are on their minds. Anne Volkwein with a great question. She wants to know, how can Givvor be used in a live event setting? So as we go back to in-person fundraising,
Yeah.
how do you guys have a place in that world?
Well, I think it's where it's sort of where the two worlds meet, right? I mean, and this is where I see a big part of the benefit, because a lot of things aren't going to go back to normal, right? They're gonna be something different. There's going to be a lot more Zoom meetings. There's going to be in-person meetings, but the biggest thing that I think happens there is to see the things happening. You've got a typical gala or annual event where you've got silent auctions, you've got pledges to give, you've got people giving, and all of it sort of just happens, and you have cocktails and you have no idea what really happened, right? And so to be able to be at that event and to say, I mean, it's back to the gamification piece that I mentioned with you, Gary, is, Gary outbid me, but I could outdo him. Well, that's what they try to foster at those things. That's why they do the silent auctions the way they do, is, if you've got a really good MC, they're up there saying, hey, Gary just gave 10,000. Who can meet or beat Gary? So all of those pieces come into just, I'd love to be on my phone while I'm sitting at the table, listen to the speaker and see what's going on as we go. Even if there's a specific goal. You asked, and I know this is tying the two together, but you asked for a success story. We had a matching campaign that happened where a foundation put up $100,000 match. And we actually know, because we talked to the last donor in the campaign that came to the site, looked at, oh, there's only $9,000 left to fully exhaust that match. I was going to give less, but why not finish it off? So they got a $9,000 donation from someone who would have arbitrarily picked a lower number. I mean, that, even though that was in a, electronic or COVID place, that same sort of thing happens in person. That same thing can happen anytime you bring your donors together in any form.
Got it. Okay. Fantastic question coming up from Rafael Gutierrez. And it's something I was wondering about when you were talking. Rafael wants to know, how are nonprofit organizations vetted prior to being added to the platform? And that's fantastic, because you were talking before about a variety of charitable organizations that
Yep.
don't give money to the intended fund. We all
Yep.
know there are supposed charitable organizations that have been used for money laundering.
Yep.
I think Raphael's question about how do you vet these people, or organizations rather, it's a great question. What do you guys do in that area?
Well, it's a great question. It's also a complex question because, presumably these organizations are vetted to just get a nonprofit status. Now we know that that's not always true, that some slip through the cracks, but we use basically the resources available to us from public data. So we use IRS data initially, we use the different rating agencies, et cetera, and other third-party sources to ensure, these groups are who they say they are. And there's another side to that, which is, because we're making every nonprofit available to donors, there's the other side of it, is how do you stop fraud where people are claiming to be the Red Cross, but they're not. And
Mhm.
so we've got a fairly sophisticated system that I'm not going to share all the details of, because that would totally defeat the point, that keeps it secure. But there's another piece to that I think is better, which is we're not here to choose winners or losers or to make judgments. We're here to connect the donors to those organizations. And if those donors are going, hey, did anybody notice in the annual report last year that, only a nickel of every $100 went to the cause that they're out there promoting, that community is going to turn on that charity. And self-policing is a very valid way to do things, and not in terms of just outrage cancel culture, which I think is so prevalent today. I'm not just going to cancel a nonprofit because I don't like it. Well, I don't get to be a part of that nonprofit unless I've given to it. So part of the vetting process is that the donors that are in there that you're exposed to are truly supporters. And we're lucky in a way that we have the ability to set minimum donations. We have all those, and so does the organization itself. So they are creating some vulnerability that if they are illegitimate or criminal or not trustworthy, then they're probably not going to like Givvor, because the donors are going to be able to say it.
The thing I love about your answer is it satisfies the Nassim Taleb skin in the game principle, right? It's the
Yep.
donors, not
Yep.
not the cancelers. It's the donors who are policing the site, the people
Yes,
who have money up and are invested in an outcome. It's a
exactly
great
right.
answer. Love it. Okay. Down to our last question here. Good one from Joe Finnegan. He wanted to know how many nonprofits are on Givvor. I think you had mentioned earlier it's something like 1.8 million. Is that right?
That, that is correct. Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
huge number. How did you end up with so many?
Well, again, it's back to that part of the vetting and part of the sort of onboarding of those nonprofits is, in fact, some of the public data. So any nonprofit, and it goes beyond just 501c3s, because everybody thinks a nonprofit and charity is the same thing. But you can even donate to a political campaign through Givvor. You can donate through a lot of different things, and even there, I mean, back where we talked about credit cards and other things, you've got to keep your employer, your occupation, your all these other things that are required on political donations. Well, we have them on file for you, so you can do that easily and quickly. But the other thing that, for better or worse, we kind of live in this world where if you make a certain set of political donations, you're more likely to support these causes. And part of that recommendation engine that we've built doesn't differentiate. It just looks at what do donors have in common, and what do they have in common that they support. And so it is able to bring people to those things.
Got it. All right. Fantastic answer. We're here, everyone, with Alex Huff, founder and CEO of Givvor. I'm Gary Brode of Deep Knowledge Investing. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us. You can view more of our stories on www.terra.bz/impact. Thanks for joining us, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me.